Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Any minute now, President Trump will deliver a speech that is likely to have huge repercussions for the world's most troubled region, the Middle East. Donald Trump is expected to say that America will now recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Now, that's controversial because Jerusalem is contested territory, with Palestinians wanting part of the city to be their capital too. Even America's allies, including Britain, are lining up to criticize Mr. Trump's proposal. Here's our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, on why the speech could lead to new unrest and even violence.
The sites at the heart of Jerusalem that are holy to Christians, Muslims and Jews are the source of its religious and political power. And the reason why it has a blood-stained history stretching back 3,000 years. For both Israelis and Palestinians, Jerusalem is a capital and a religious symbol. In the city, politics and faith are hopelessly tangled. In Washington, President Trump seems convinced he's doing the right thing.
It's long overdue. Many presidents have said they want to do something and they didn't do it. Whether it's through courage or they changed their mind, I can't tell you.
Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel's prime minister, is delighted. He said it was a great day for Israel's national identity. Jerusalem is always tense. The conflict is part of everyone's lives. The city is quietest when nothing challenges the status quo. The new US policy is a big change, and that makes it dangerous and could mean the idea of peace through establishing an independent Palestine alongside Israel even less realistic.
The US is delivering a lethal bullet to the heart of the two-state solution. That would be actually the kiss of death to the two-state solution, because Jerusalem is at the very heart of the two-state solution. It's the major pillar of it.
Jerusalem has been at the center of the shared and troubled history of Israel and the Palestinians. Israel became independent after a war in 1948. The Arabs lost, and 750,000 Palestinians were expelled by Israel or fled. When the shooting stopped, Jerusalem was divided between Israel and neighboring Jordan. Israel declared its side to be its capital. The rest of the world didn't agree, arguing that Jerusalem's final status was undecided. In 1967, Israel beat all its Arab neighbors in another war. The Jordanians were forced out of their east side of Jerusalem, which includes the walled Old City and Jerusalem's most important holy sites. Israel annexed the city and extended its borders. In 1993, Israelis and Palestinians started a peace process. One of the biggest issues was the future of Jerusalem. Palestinians want a capital of a future state to be in the east of the city. Israel hinted at compromise, but the peace process broke down years ago. And the current Israeli government says Jerusalem will not be divided. Britain has big doubts.
We think that Jerusalem obviously should be part of the final settlement between the Israelis and the Palestinians, a negotiated settlement that we want to see. And we have no plans ourselves to move our embassy.
King Abdullah of Jordan is in Turkey for talks with President Erdogan, both very important neighbors of the Israelis. The leaders oppose Trump's change to the status quo in Jerusalem. The city, they believe, is the key to peace.
I did re-emphasize to the US President yesterday our concerns on the decision to move the US Embassy to Jerusalem. Therefore, it is imperative now to work fast to reach a final status solution and a peace agreement between Palestinians and Israelis.
In Gaza, there were small demonstrations. The US and Israel may be gambling that the anger of Palestinians and all the others who've condemned Trump's plan won't last long. The risk is that they're wrong. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
Well, in a moment, we'll be getting the latest from our North America editor, John Sopel, in Washington. But first, Yolande Knell is in Jerusalem. Yolanda, we're still waiting for the exact wording that Mr. Trump will use, but what do you think the likely reaction is going to be in the region?
Well, for many Israelis, Mr. Trump's planned moves will correct what they see as an historic injustice. It's long been a cause of upset for them that the US, Israel's closest ally, doesn't have its embassy here in Jerusalem, that it doesn't recognize formally Israeli sovereignty over the city, which they see, of course, as their eternal undivided capital. So we've had Israeli politicians coming out already, welcoming the suggestions that are being put out and saying that they hope that other countries will follow Washington's lead on all of this. But the Palestinians are sounding alarm. The Palestinian ambassador to the UK has called this the kiss of death for Mr. Trump's hopes of restarting the stalled Middle East peace process.
All right, Yolanda. John in Washington. I mean, most US presidents try to calm tensions in the Middle East. Mr. Trump seems to be trying to do the very opposite.
Well, Donald Trump follows in a long tradition, as you say, of US presidents trying to bring peace to the Middle East, but few have gone about it in such an unorthodox way, and he's just started speaking now. He's got two broad goals. The first is to honour an election pledge, which is to move the US embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and to recognise that the capital is Jerusalem. The other is to bring peace to the Middle East. Now, despite the warnings from many people that the two are kind of mutually exclusive, if you do the first, how on earth are you going to bring Arabs to the table in a spirit of believing that the Americans are fair and even-handed in their approach? Donald Trump will argue, look, it's historic reality, it is present-day reality that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. But he's run into a lot of opposition, and the White House has gone on a charm offensive to win over people. So far, he's only won over the Israelis.
John Sopel, Yolanda Nell, thank you both very much.
President Trump has made perhaps his most divisive and controversial decision yet, officially recognising Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. The move breaks with decades of US foreign policy on a city which is contested by Arabs and Jews. It's delighted Israelis but angered Palestinians and most of the Arab world. Our Washington correspondent Robert Moore has the latest.
Precious to three religions and to two peoples, Jerusalem is the most contested and culturally sensitive city in the world. And it is for that reason that any announcement about its status has the potential to be so inflammatory. And within the last few minutes, President Trump walked into the minefield with this announcement.
I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering. I've judged this course of action to be in the best interests of the United States of America and the pursuit of peace between Israel and the Palestinians.
But he also stressed that this move was not intended to hinder a final Palestinian-Israeli peace settlement.
We want an agreement that is a great deal for the Israelis and a great deal for the Palestinians. We are not taking a position of any final status issues, including the specific boundaries of the Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem or the resolution of contested borders.
In May, the president visited the Western Wall, part of East Jerusalem, territory much of the world regards as illegally occupied by Israel. So Trump's vow today to move the US embassy from the coastal city of Tel Aviv to Jerusalem sends a signal to the Palestinians the city's status is being decided ahead of any peace negotiations.
Tanto caro a mí.
Religious figures, including the Pope, and world leaders all warned the president of grave consequences.
Ignoring the Palestinian Muslim and Christian rights in Jerusalem will only fuel further extremism and undermine the war against terrorism.
The high point of US diplomacy in the Middle East was the Camp David Agreement of 1978. Then America was seen by Arabs and Israelis alike as the indispensable player. Today, the White House appears to have abandoned its role as an honest broker.
Thank you very much.
By ignoring world opinion, the president is taking a tremendous risk, without even a viable peace plan being on the table. Well, the diplomatic consequences of this will be felt far, far beyond the Middle East. European leaders, for sure, will feel ignored. Christian leaders will feel certainly dismayed. And all those around the world who advocate for the Palestinian cause will feel this is a major setback to their goal of two states, of Israel and an independent Palestine living side by side peacefully.
Robert, thank you. Mr. Trump's decision will be the kiss of death to any hopes of a two-state solution to the conflict, the Palestinian Liberation Organization has warned. And ordinary Palestinians living in the Holy City say the United States is playing with fire. Dan Rivers reports from Jerusalem on the new threat to an ancient battle.
Even before the official announcement, there was fury. Any shred of America as a peace broker has been destroyed in their eyes. In Jerusalem today, the mood is as bleak as the weather. 3 days of rage has been declared by Palestinian groups, and Israeli soldiers in the old city are braced for the worst. If Jerusalem is one of the most contentious problems in the world's oldest conflict, then religious sites like this are at the core of the dispute. This is the reason why Jerusalem is so important to both sides. The Temple Mount, or the Al-Aqsa compound, is revered by both Jews and Muslims, and neither Israelis nor Palestinians could ever countenance a future in which Jerusalem wasn't their capital. Israel captured the old city in 1967, and hardline Israeli politicians have pushed for decades to get America to designate it as their capital. In Donald Trump, they finally found a president who would. But for ordinary Palestinians, it is a betrayal.
Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque, it's a red line, and it's when Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu or Donald Trump, when they talking about this, they are playing in fire.
Some moderate Israelis might agree, but not settlers like Joshua Wanda, whose apartment looks out on the old city. He will never give up.
When you start a negotiation, you need to start with the understanding of where our red lines are, where we're not going. We were never willing to negotiate Jerusalem.
This city's history is a delicate tangle of politics and religion. President Trump's announcement is a provocative moment. Despite tonight's calm, its violent past would suggest it may not last. Well, in the last few minutes, we've had reaction from the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who has said that this is an important step towards peace. He said it's an historic day. He said Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel for the last 70 years and of the Jewish people for the last 3,000 years. But he did stress, though, that there would be no change in status to those important religious historical sites. There's been no reaction from the Palestinians yet. President Mahmoud Abbas is due to speak shortly. Many Palestinians, though, will be digesting those words of President Trump and, frankly, reeling from them, feeling that it leaves both the two-state solution and the peace process dead.
Dan, thank you.
It is time. With those words, President Donald Trump confirmed the US is to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. He called it a step towards peace, but it's feared it will be quite the opposite, with warnings from Palestinians and many international leaders that the move would increase tension in the region. He's directed the State Department to begin preparations to move the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Our Washington correspondent Kylie Morris joins us now. Kylie, a pretty momentous day.
Indeed, a monumental decision by President Trump. Interestingly, as he made his remarks, the Vice President, the evangelical Mike Pence, was standing right behind him. And I think this will be met with real delight by the religious right, by the conservative base, by the kind of pro-Likud Israel lobby here in the United States, to whom Donald Trump made this promise. However, at the same time, there will be real fears about the impact it will have on any future peace negotiations and whether America now hasn't just declared its hand in favour of Israel when it comes to any final status plans or remedies for Jerusalem. The president made his announcement by declaring old challenges demand new approaches.
But today we finally acknowledge the obvious, that Jerusalem is Israel's capital. This is nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It is also the right thing to do.
With this single act, President Trump has upended the careful dance of presidents past who embraced the concept of recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moving the US embassy to Jerusalem, but adhered to the view that until there was a definitive peace agreement between Israelis and Palestinians, the ancient city's status could not be settled. As candidate last year, he gave his word to the Israel lobby. He was different.
When I become president, the days of treating Israel like a second-class citizen will end on day one.
In truth, it's taken nearly a year for the president to get this far, and he does so despite warnings that it will implode the status quo and any prospect of peace.
There will, of course, be disagreement and dissent regarding this announcement. But we are confident that ultimately, as we work through these disagreements, we will arrive at a peace and a place far greater in understanding and cooperation.
This was the role in which the US cast itself previously, a broker of peace, not a taker of sides. From Jimmy Carter to Bill Clinton, the president always sought the middle ground. Not President Trump, and there's more at play here than rewarding Israel's loyalty and satisfying America's religious right. He wants to recast the Middle East and face down Iran. With his colourful embrace of Saudi Arabia and new outreach to Israel, he has two of Tehran's fiercest enemies on his side. Just to stay in step, maybe Riyadh won't complain too much on the part of the Palestinians.
We want an agreement that is a great deal for the Israelis and a great deal for the Palestinians. We are not taking a position of any final status issues, including the specific boundaries of the Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem or the resolution of contested borders.
But critics warn the president has given a gift to Israel before his son-in-law's peace-brokering efforts really get underway, imposing terms no Palestinian leader could ever agree to.
Kylie Morris reporting from Washington. Well, even before President Trump made his announcement, there were angry denunciations of his decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital city. International leaders warned that it could fuel extremism and undermine the fight against terrorism, as our international editor Lindsay Hilsum now reports.
Even before the announcement, Palestinians were out burning flags and images of Donald Trump, an American president who doesn't even try to appear even-handed on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's alarmed leaders who fear that today's announcement will fan the flames across the Middle East.
There is no alternative to the two-state solution, and Jerusalem is key to any peace agreement, and it is key to the stability of the entire region. Now, ignoring the Palestinian Muslim and Christian rights in Jerusalem will only fuel further extremism and undermine the war against terrorism.
This morning, the Israeli leader Benjamin Netanyahu, by contrast, was looking pretty pleased, and tonight he was exultant.
This decision reflects the president's commitment to an ancient but enduring truth, to fulfilling his promises, and to advancing peace. The president's decision is an important step towards peace, for there is no peace that doesn't include Jerusalem as the capital of the State of Israel.
Both Israel and the Palestinians regard Jerusalem as their capital. The issue goes to the heart of the conflict. In 1949, the Israelis moved their government institutions from Tel Aviv to West Jerusalem, but foreign embassies remained in Tel Aviv because the status of Jerusalem was disputed. East Jerusalem, home to the sacred sites of Judaism, Christianity and Islam, remained under Jordanian control. But in 1967, Israel seized the east of the city in the Six-Day War and then annexed it, a move that has never been accepted by the international community. Today, the Dome of the Rock rose undisturbed from the famous skyline, but Jerusalem has frequently been a flashpoint for violence. In 2000, the then Israeli opposition leader Ariel Sharon visited the Muslim holy site in a deliberate provocation. He said it was his right as a Jew to go there, but the visit triggered the Second Intifada, or uprising, in which thousands of people, mostly Palestinians, were killed. Palestinians have been evicted from their homes in East Jerusalem as Israeli groups systematically buy up Arab land and houses. This July, in reaction to the killing of 2 Israeli police officers, the Israelis installed a system of metal detectors on Palestinians entering the mosque at Haram al-Sharif without consulting the mosque authorities, again sparking violent protests. The plan to move the US embassy from Tel Aviv is a huge blow to the Palestinians. Mr. Trump didn't acknowledge their claim on Jerusalem at all.
It does represent a departure, very serious departure from established American positions that were followed and adopted by successive American administrations. It also represents a grave violation of international law.
Some say President Trump's announcement is a symbolic gesture. Nothing will change on the ground. But this is a conflict where people kill and die to defend symbols.
Well, I hope to be joined shortly from Washington, D.C. by Hussam Zomlot, the Palestinians' chief delegate to the U.S. and senior advisor to President Mahmoud Abbas. But first, the human rights lawyer and political analyst Arsen Ostrovsky joins me from Tel Aviv. Mr. Ostrovsky, the Palestinians have described this decision today as a kiss of death. The U.S. ally, Saudi Arabia, has said this is a flagrant provocation to Muslims. And this decision has been taken by the president who boasted he could bring peace to the Middle East.
Look, I think we need to put this in context. As President Trump said in his remarks, that today we finally acknowledge the obvious, that Jerusalem is Israel's capital, and that is just acknowledging the reality, and that is also the right thing to do. With all due respect to the Palestinians, the only reason we are here today is through their incessant refusal to negotiate in good faith with the Israelis for a two-state solution, which they purportedly so desire. At the end of the day, what President Trump did was simply correct a long overdue injustice in recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital.
But what President Trump didn't do was recognize in any way that the Palestinians claim Jerusalem as their capital.
Look, he did also add that I'm paraphrasing, that in the negotiation between the parties, if another agreement is reached between them, then he will accept that, and noting that he didn't define where the borders are. But the reality is, and we need to be also very clear about this, is that Jerusalem has been the capital city of the Jewish people, and only the Jewish people, throughout history. This year we marked 50 years of the reunification of the city, but yet the Jewish people's connection to it extends to well over 3,000 years. The seat of government, the Knesset is here, the High Court, all the institutions. The unfortunate reality is that had the Palestinians accepted past agreements, including very generous offers with respect to Jerusalem, such as at Camp David in 2000, the situation could be very different today. But we are faced with a new set of realities and a new administration.
But excuse me for interrupting, the other unfortunate reality is that there's no longer any pretense that the US are honest brokers here in any future negotiations, is there?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. I think all the US has done is just acknowledge the reality. Jerusalem has been the capital of the State of Israel for 70 years, but of the Jewish people for over 3,000 years. London has been the capital of England only since the 12th century. So there's, in one way, this is a very historic decision, announcement, but on the other hand, it's also just really stating the obvious, that this is the capital of the State of Israel. Every country under international law with the exception of Israel here, is permitted to designate its own capital. But Israel has been the only country since 1948 which has been denied that right.
Okay.
So this action, I think, is very much one that corrects an injustice.
Okay, Arsen Ostrowski, thank you very much for joining me. Let's turn now to Hussam Zomlot, Palestinians' chief delegate to the US. Thank you very much for joining us. I don't know whether you heard any of that last guest, but Jerusalem is it's where the Israeli government is. This is recognising a reality, and it's long overdue, is what he said.
That's absolutely not true. Today, President Trump has just adopted fully the narrative and the myths of the very few, actually, in Israel, the settler government, the very extreme wing of the Israeli government. The majority of the Israelis still want to see a two-state solution on the 1967 borders. That's all polls. So are the majority of the Palestinian people and the rest of the world. Global consensus. Today was a black day for peace in the Middle East because President Trump has decided to let go of everything that we have worked towards. Today is a black day also for the prospects for the US to be a fair and honest broker in this, because it has done a self-inflicted disqualification, and today also has demolished the basis of the peace process that we have been engaged in for the last 25 years.
So what are the consequences of that? I mean, will President Mahmoud Abbas refuse to negotiate through the US with Israel, for example?
Negotiate on what? In 1991 we started this peace process, and we started it after a letter of invitation and guarantee we received from Secretary of State James Baker, Bush the father, the administration, and in that letter, which I have with me now, in that letter the US confirmed and committed that the peace process will be based on the UN Security Council resolutions 242 and 338. That means that Israel must end its occupation that began in 1967, including East Jerusalem as an occupied city. Number two, that the US confirms its commitment never to change the status of Jerusalem, and that Jerusalem East is occupied, and that the US will never recognize Israel's control of the city or annexation of the city. That's written letter. On that basis, we entered the peace process because Jerusalem is the heart of the two-state solution. And now we have this stab in the back, a sudden U-turn from the US administration, and you tell me what would be the consequences? The consequences is the peace process has been emptied of its soul and heart, and we are not interested in an empty peace process. We are seriously, genuinely and sincerely interested in a genuine peace process that will produce the international consensus about a two-state solution. But should this option be killed by
we're a little bit short of time, and I'm trying to have a dialogue here. If I could just say, I mean, the Saudis today, they reacted much the same way you've reacted, calling this a flagrant provocation. But isn't it the case that they'd be loath to whip up any demonstrations because the US is their ally in the fight against Iran?
And that's exactly the right question, because by doing this, President Trump has delivered a severe blow to the historic and strategic allies of the US for all these years, including Saudi Arabia, including Jordan, Egypt, all the Arab countries that are in alliance with the US, and has just given a precious gift to the extremist, to the anarchist, to the Armageddonist, to those who want to see this conflict as a religious one, the war of gods, rather than a political and legal one to be resolved. He totally and utterly, that is President Trump, adopted the myths and the narratives that does not speak of reality. Let me remind you and your viewers, please, that East Jerusalem is owned by Palestinians. This is not a claim. This is not a claim we make.
We're going to have to end it there, I'm afraid. I would love to carry on talking longer, but Hussam Zomlot, thank you very much.
What the Middle East needs now, said no one ever, is something to make the region's politics more complicated. America's president seems to have missed the memo. This evening, Donald Trump confirmed a campaign pledge, the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, a symbolic statement fraught with practical implications. In a tightly scripted address, he said he would build the US embassy in that city, insisting he was acting in the pursuit of peace between Israel and the Palestinians, and that the US supported a two-state solution if agreed by both sides. He was warmly thanked by Israel's Prime Minister, fury from many on the other side. Tonight we asked those right around the region what the ramifications of this move are likely to be. But we start with this report by Gabriel Gatehouse.
Jerusalem is many things to many people. A place that embodies the shared heritage of the world's great monotheistic civilizations, and a city whose ancient walls have long been an incubator for their festering divisions. Today, Donald Trump walked into this most treacherous of minefields and pledged to shake things up.
When I came into office, I promised to look at the world's challenges with open eyes and very fresh thinking. We cannot solve our problems by making the same failed assumptions and repeating the same failed strategies of the past.
His announcement was anticipated with foreboding in the Middle East, but there were hints that he might be aiming at an audience closer to home.
Therefore, I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. While previous presidents have made this a major campaign promise, they failed to deliver. Today, I am delivering.
If Donald Trump's motivation was born in part out of a desire to deliver on the pledges of 2016, then the ramifications of this announcement reach much further back in history. In 1948, when the Jewish state was born, Israel proclaimed Jerusalem its capital. But on the ground, the city was divided into western and eastern sectors. Israel controlled the west. Jordan administered the largely Palestinian east, including the Old City. Then came the War of 1967. In 6 days, the same time it took the God of the Old Testament to create the world, Israel redrew the map of the Middle East. The shape of the current conflict has its roots in that historical moment. Israel seized the eastern part of the city and expanded the city limits. Under international law, East Jerusalem is occupied territory, and the Palestinians want to see it become the capital of a future independent state. Today's announcement has, in fact, been a long time coming. In 1995, Congress passed an act requiring the US government to move its embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Since then, every 6 months, every president has deferred that move on the grounds of national security. Today, President Obama's successor promised to put an end to that.
This is nothing more or less than a recognition of reality. It is also the right thing to do. It's something that has to be done.
And with that, at a stroke, many diplomats fear that America's crucial role as a peace broker has been fatally undermined.
Much of the statement will leave a sense of a vacancy. And I think others in Europe and across the Arab world will now wonder where this process goes next and whether America, particularly under President Trump, is really committed to a genuine, fair two-state solution.
Donald Trump said America was.
The United States would support a two-state solution if agreed to by both sides.
I think there was evidence that some of those diplomats who've been trying to reduce the negative impact of this announcement did get to work on that text.
There was some reassurance for the Palestinians who want a return to pre-1967 borders.
We are not taking a position of any final status issues, including the specific boundaries of the Israeli sovereignty in Jerusalem or the resolution of contested borders.
But it doesn't really negate what is still a very dangerous announcement at a very delicate time for the Middle East. And I think that the sad thing is that many of those extremists across the region will be the ones who are celebrating this in the morning.
Donald Trump has sent his young son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to the Middle East in search of what he calls the ultimate deal.
We want an agreement that is a great deal for the Israelis and a great deal for the Palestinians.
I would be the first one to celebrate if there is a superbly crafted strategy behind this announcement, but I won't be holding my breath. We hear a lot about Donald Trump being a great deal maker, and certainly in his book he says you've got to hold back many of the strongest cards you have. It looks as though he's played one of those cards a little too early.
That was Gabriel Gatehouse. Now, in a moment, we'll hear from the Israeli ambassador, Mark Regev, and the Palestinian academic, Ghada Karmi, although we're not expecting to resolve the region's issues here in the Newsnight studio tonight, so they won't be debating head-to-head. Let's go first to our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban, who's here. What surprised you most about Trump's announcement, Mark?
Well, I think given that there was the nod towards the two-state solution and the statement by the President that it wasn't intended, today's move, to prejudice the final status issues, he could have acknowledged the Palestinian aspiration to have their capital in East Jerusalem. It could have been something he'd done. I mean, it's many years since the diplomatic game was about, say, an international solution for Jerusalem, a sort of zone to be ruled by the international community, that sort of thing. For decades now, it's been about the two-state solution. And everybody who's worked that problem, every diplomat I've spoken to for 30 years on this, knows that a Palestinian state without its capital in East Jerusalem is not a viable solution to the conflict.
What do you make of those internationally showing support for this move?
Well, there have been one or two, interestingly, and going back to that point, the Czech Republic, for example, which said today that it would follow the American lead and move its embassy to Jerusalem, did also mention the Palestinian aspiration for a capital in East Jerusalem. The Philippines has also followed suit, but obviously, by and large, the reaction has been negative. The UK has said it won't be moving its embassy. Many other European countries taking a similar tone. We'll see if some others join in with the Czech Republic and the Philippines in the coming days.
Mark, thanks very much. Let's pick up with our guest, Gada Kami. I'm going to start with you. Thanks for coming in. Donald Trump is right, isn't he, when he says the old way is broken and there is no point in repeating the exact same formula. You have to reach out to new solutions.
No, he's not right. He doesn't know anything about it. I tell you what the Middle East doesn't really need right now is a know-nothing American president like Donald Trump. And the reality is that the American president has endorsed an illegal situation. Israel is in illegal occupation of East Jerusalem, Arab Jerusalem, and its sovereignty over West Jerusalem is not recognized by the international community. That is a legal fact. Now, Donald Trump has chosen to violate international law by endorsing something very illegal, which is Israeli control, sovereignty over Jerusalem, calling itself the capital, this kind of thing. This is very, very bad.
When he says he is deeply committed to peace, when he says this is nothing more than a recognition of reality, do you not have faith that this is the first step of what could be a solution?
No, of course not. First of all, it does not acknowledge that the Palestinians have any rights. I notice your commentator, Mark Urban, talking about aspiration. Palestinians have a right to the city. I was born in Jerusalem. I'm part of the indigenous people of Jerusalem. I'm a native of Jerusalem. I have rights. I don't have aspirations. And the fact that the President of the United States can't even bring himself to mention the Palestinian rights in that city is appalling. And that's the first problem. And of course, the second problem is we know that Donald Trump is not a free agent. He is surrounded by pro-Israel advisors, pro-Israel officials.
To be fair, the American stance towards Israel has not differed particularly from one president to another.
No, because it's always been dictated by Israeli interests.
So what are you saying, that he cannot broker peace, or America cannot broker peace in the region?
No, of course not. He can't. He's compromised. He is surrounded by pro-Israel propagandists, people who want Israel's interest above any other. He cannot operate as a free agent, even if he had the wit to do it.
God, I want to talk about the practicalities now, because he has said he's calling on both sides to respect the status quo. How should Mahmoud Abbas respond? How should young Palestinian men respond if they feel upset by what they've heard tonight? Should they legitimately protest, or should they work towards this two-state solution that he talked about?
Yeah, listen, there's no two-state solution possible. If Jerusalem has gone out of the equation, so we can forget about that, please, let's discuss it. Now, when you say how they should, I don't know how they should, but I know how they feel. They will protest, they are angry, and they have every right to be angry. What is so dangerous about this? Because it's not even... Look, it's bad enough it's illegal. It's bad enough that Trump is influenced by all kinds of...
But I'm talking about the practicalities. At this point, do the moderates just give up and say, we can't even envisage a two-state solution?
Listen. It's not about moderates. It's not about extremists. Please let me be clear. This is about a people, a whole people who have rights in that city. Of course they're angry. Of course they will protest. Nobody should be surprised. Why I think this is so dangerous, apart from the fact it's absolutely misguided, why it is so dangerous is because, you know, one of the first things that might happen, and watch for this, is that Israel will be emboldened to take over the Islamic holy places. Okay. It's had its eye on the Al-Qudwa Mosque for a long time, and if they take it over now with lots of new self-confidence, watch what happens.
Let me put some of those points now to Mark Regev. Thank you very much indeed. Ambassador, it's hard to think of a more provocative way to hunt for peace in the Middle East than this statement. It is a joke, isn't it?
I beg to disagree, Emily. I think this was a just move and a good move for peace. It's a just move because there's an international norm that everyone respects.
Norm?
A norm.
The EU doesn't. The Pope doesn't. The UN doesn't.
Allow me to make my point, Emily. There's a norm that it's respected every country's right to choose their capital. That's a sovereign right of every country on the planet. And there are countries, as you know, Emily, who have changed their capital cities. Turkey changed its capital city, China changed its capital city, and even
how
Germany.
Provocative this move is.
But
Every bit of symbolism
why are we
counts.
denied the right? Why are we denied the right to choose our own capital city, a right that every country on this planet has?
So you can call it what you want, the Palestinians can call it what they want. My question to you is, from what you have seen so far of Donald Trump, what is it that makes you think he is a classy peace broker? What is it that makes you think he's committed to solving the world's crisis, that he has a firm grip on international relations? Do you really want to tie your country's future to him as a peace broker?
I would urge you to look at this decision on the substance, and the substance is positive.
The substance is that he is saying he's committed to a two-state solution, to a peace process, and he's done that by deeply offending and inflaming relations in that part of the world.
Let's stop for a moment. The Palestinians and the Arab world officially say that they recognize Israel within the 1967 boundaries. And so we all know that Jerusalem has been the capital of Israel since 1949. So why is there a problem with recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital? All the issues of borders can be negotiated.
It's extraordinary that you are putting that question to me. You know this area. You know the complexities inside out. You have a responsibility, don't you, to tell him he's wrong. Didn't you think it would be more important to not look at the short-term gains and to get the longer-term peace process right?
We all have a responsibility to get it right. And what is the fact? The fact is the Israeli government sits in Jerusalem. Our executive is there. Our Supreme Court is there. Our parliament is there. When foreign leaders choose to meet with Israeli leaders, they come to Jerusalem. When foreign diplomats meet with their Israeli counterparts, they come to Jerusalem.
You're parroting his lines without
this.
acknowledging quite how much offence it has caused to Palestinian residents. Now, you heard what Geet just said. She said it will embolden Israelis to forget the two-state solution, to forget the sanctity of the Mosque of Al-Aqsa and all the rest of it, because this is where you think now that Israel can claim whatever it wants. You have the acceptance of the US
My Prime Minister
President.
said just 2 hours ago, he said that we will maintain the holy sites and continue to keep the status quo, and the religious rights of all peoples will be protected.
You need to do more than that, don't you? It's not just about religious freedoms. It's about respecting people who call that their home and who assert their claim to it. So my question to you is, what is the olive branch now that Israel, the Israeli government, has to offer to Palestinians to recognise that this is something that they do not consider fair?
Let's be clear what's fair.
Or legal.
You cannot, and legal. You could not have peace without Jerusalem being Israel's capital. And those on the Palestinian side who have these dangerous fantasies that somehow we're going to throw all the Jews out of Jerusalem, that is a non-starter. And if President Trump today has drawn a line in the sand and said it's time for the Palestinians to recognize that the Jewish people have national rights in Jerusalem, that we have a right to our own capital city, that is a positive mood. It's just, and it's good for peace.
Mark Regev, thank you very much indeed. We're going to pick up on those thoughts with two more key players. Congressman Lee Zeldin is a Republican member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee in the US and co-chairman of the House Republican Israel Caucus. Ilnur Çevik is chief advisor to the Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan. Very nice to have you here. Let me start with you, Ilnur Çevik. the onus, according to Ambassador Regev, is now on the Palestinians to accept this recognition, to move on peace. What do you say to that?
Well, it takes two to dance. And if you do not recognize the Palestinian rights, if you do not extend an olive branch to the Palestinians, what can you ask from them? What can you expect from them? It's a very hard thing to turn to these people and say, Jerusalem is the capital, finished. Now, if they had said, fine, West Jerusalem, we have declared the capital of Israel, and the Palestinians have a right for East Jerusalem to be their capital.
So as a key player in the region, what does Turkey do now? How do you face this new reality?
Well, Turkey is frustrated, deeply frustrated, because Turkey feels that while it wants to maintain relations with Israel for the sake of the Palestinians, it is becoming harder and harder for Turkey to maintain a kind of plausible relationship with Israel. The Turkish president has already said we may even sever ties.
You think that will happen now?
Turkey may downgrade its relations, I don't know. It depends on how the situation develops.
Would you be as bold with your relations with the US now?
Well, Turkey is not going. Turkey has already announced that it rejects the US decision. The Turkish parliament, for the first time, all the parties have come together, the Kurds, the left wing, everybody, for the first time in nearly 10 years, they've come together to denounce the American decision. And this shows it's not only Recep Tayyip Erdogan, but it's across the board, all parties who are usually against the Turkish government, the opposition, have come together to reject this decision.
You heard the voice in our film earlier saying this is a victory for extremists
Yes.
who can ride roughshod over moderate views now and say, you know, we have to respond to this in the only way that we see fit. So what do you have to do as a key player in the region to make sure it doesn't inflame? I mean, by severing relations, you're ducking out, right?
Well, yes. This is, the Turkish president has said, this is one of the options. He didn't say it's going to happen.
No, but I'm just asking, you know, you're his chief advisor. What will you be advising him tonight?
Well, our advice, of course, would be that we need a kind of leverage on Israel.
Yeah.
Some form of leverage is needed there. However, the Palestinians have a right. And when you do not answer to the demands of moderate Palestinians who want peace, who want just their rights, who want Jerusalem, who have been born in Jerusalem, to say this is my home, if they are denied those rights, then we're all playing into the hands of the radicals.
OK. Ilna Čević, thank you very much, and thank you for coming in. Let's pick up now with Lee Zeldin, a Republican member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Thanks for joining us. You've got the Pope against you, the UN, the EU, most countries except, I think it was the Philippines and the Czech Republic. Have you got any qualms about what your president's done tonight?
I strongly support the president's decision. It is a fact that the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. This is where the Israeli Knesset is located, the offices and homes of the Israeli prime minister and president, where the Supreme Court is located. We really need to all be honest with each other, that the fact is that the capital of Israel is Jerusalem.
Well, the geographical niceties seem to overlook what a precarious political position this has put Israel and the Palestinians in this evening.
Well, I would say what really complicates things the most is when you have Palestinian terrorists murdering innocent Israelis. And just yesterday, the House of Representatives passed the Taylor Force Act. Taylor Force was a graduate of the United States Military Academy, a West Point, an Army veteran who was brutally murdered by a Palestinian terrorist.
And you think this will help?
I would say that Palestinian... I think that is a huge issue that needs to get addressed, because on one side, you have a party trying to promote peace, and on the other side, you're treating terrorists as martyrs and heads of state and financially rewarding terrorism.
So you have a president, clearly, who tries to ban Muslims from certain countries even coming into the US. Do you think he is the right man to broker peace in Israel, in the Middle East?
Well, peace is going to be negotiated on the ground. Regardless of whoever the American president is at any time, it's going to be important that whoever is in charge of Israel, whoever's in charge of the Palestinian Authority, they have the ability between the two of them to be able to negotiate a long-term peace, one that over the course of generations, not just years and decades at this point, but generations has been elusive. Well, but I don't know of any single person outside of Israel and that region capable of doing this for them. It really needs to be done on the ground.
Right, so maybe he should have stayed out of it. Our Palestinian guest just called President Trump a know-nothing American.
Well, again, the capital of Israel is Jerusalem. I'm not questioning that the Palestinian Authority is headquartered in Ramallah. I've been to Ramallah. I met with the Prime Minister of the Palestinian Authority. I don't question that that's where their offices are located. That's where they are headquartered at. So, there are certain realities here that, and Prime Minister Hamdallah said in no uncertain terms to my face that he will not recognize Israel as a Jewish state. So there are certain aspects here that you also have to consider the fact that if the Palestinian Authority leadership was in good faith negotiating a deal at some point, let's say people are sitting down in 2018, is that there's an element within the Palestinian Authority that will not rest. Hamas won't rest unless Israel's wiped off the map.
Lee Zeldin, we've run out of time, but we appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much indeed.